In the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon, a 58-year-old single father was about to shatter his daughter's perception of him forever. What began as a hurtful comment at a family gathering spiraled into a secret mission that would leave his entire family speechless. Frank Morgan wasn't your typical maintenance worker. For decades, he had sacrificed his financial stability for his children's future, known for putting their education and opportunities ahead of his own comfort. When his successful daughter Rebecca publicly dismissed him as too poor for a real gift, she had no idea she was igniting a fire within her father that would change everything. Frank made a choice that would leave his family stunned. What began as a wounded heart became a determined mission. His children would never expect what happened next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The spring rain tapped gently against the windows of the community center in East Portland, where Frank Morgan stood adjusting his tie in the small bathroom mirror. His weathered hands, marked by decades of maintenance work, smoothed down the slightly frayed fabric of the only suit he owned. At 58, the lines around his eyes had deepened, but they still held the same warmth they always had, even if today they reflected a hint of nervousness. "You've got this," he whispered to himself, the words barely audible over the sound of laughter from the party room down the hall. 5 years since the divorce from Maria, since he'd signed over their family home to ensure she and the kids had stability while he moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment. 5 years of adjusting to a new normal, of birthday celebrations and holidays that felt slightly off-kilter without the foundation of the family home beneath them. But today felt different. Today was Rebecca's 30th birthday, and Frank was determined to make it special despite his limited resources. His daughter had blossomed into an impressive woman, a successful architect with a corner office at one of Portland's most prestigious firms, a beautiful home in the West Hills, and a confidence that sometimes bordered on something harder, something that reminded Frank of the ambition that had eventually pulled Maria away from him. The small gift-wrapped package in Frank's pocket felt suddenly inadequate. The vintage compass had cost him 3 months of careful saving, cutting back on everything but the essentials. Rebecca had always been fascinated by navigation as a child, collecting maps and plotting imaginary expeditions. The antique brass compass, restored to working condition by Frank himself, represented hours of research and work, a piece of her childhood passion brought back to life through his labor of love. The community center had been Rebecca's practical choice, affordable and centrally located for everyone, she'd explained when she'd called to invite him. Now, taking a deep breath, Frank stepped into the main room where his daughter's friends and colleagues mingled, most holding glasses of wine that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. "Dad." Rebecca's voice carried across the room as she moved toward him, elegant in a tailored dress that spoke of her success. Her smile was genuine but quick, the kind of expression you offer when checking an item off a to-do list. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it, Becca," Frank replied, using the childhood nickname she had outgrown years ago. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." The hug they shared was brief, Rebecca already glancing over his shoulder at other arriving guests. Frank noticed how she subtly guided him toward the back of the room, where her younger brother Jason stood with his wife Melissa. "Hey, Dad," Jason said warmly, giving Frank a genuine embrace. At 27, Jason had his mother's gentler nature, less driven than Rebecca but steadier in his affections. "Good to see you, Frank," Melissa smiled, squeezing his arm. "How's the new position at Westside Maintenance?" "Going well," Frank nodded, grateful for the interest. "Supervisor now, got 3 teams reporting to me. Better hours, slightly better pay." "That's great," Jason said, though Frank caught the flicker of concern in his son's eyes, the unspoken awareness that better pay in Frank's world still meant struggling to keep up with Portland's skyrocketing cost of living. The evening progressed with Frank feeling increasingly out of place among Rebecca's social circle, successful young professionals who discussed summer homes and investment portfolios while he calculated whether he could afford both a new work coat and the utility bill this month. He stayed on the periphery, nursing a single beer, watching his daughter shine in the center of attention. When the time came for gifts, Frank's stomach tightened. Rebecca's friends presented elegantly wrapped packages, designer accessories, expensive bottles of wine, gift certificates to upscale restaurants. Jason and Melissa gave her a weekend getaway to a coastal resort. Frank watched as his daughter's face lit up with each expensive offering, her gratitude effusive and performative. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward, the small package suddenly feeling impossibly tiny in his hand. "Happy birthday, Rebecca," he said, offering the carefully wrapped gift. The paper wasn't from an expensive boutique, he'd chosen it from the dollar store, but selected the design that reminded him of the maps she'd loved as a girl. Rebecca's smile flickered as she took the small package, its weight clearly signaling It wasn't the latest electronic device or luxury item. "Thanks, Dad," she said, her voice maintaining its polite enthusiasm as she unwrapped it. The brass compass gleamed in the party lights as she lifted it from its box. Frank watched her face, hoping to see recognition, remembering how she'd once proclaimed at 10 years old that explorers need to know where they're going and where they've been. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It's an antique compass," he explained, stepping closer. "I restored it myself. See how the needle still finds north perfectly?" "Remember how you used to dash a compass?" Rebecca interrupted, her smile tight as she closed the box quickly. "How thoughtful." The dismissal in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Frank felt it like a physical blow. "Well," Rebecca continued, turning to address her gathered friends, "I guess when you don't have much, you have to get creative, right, Dad?" The room went awkwardly quiet. Jason shifted uncomfortably beside Frank, while Melissa stared at her sister-in-law in disbelief. "Becca," Jason muttered in warning, but Rebecca was already moving on, picking up another gift from the table with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Now, what do we have here?" she exclaimed, leaving Frank standing there, the moment of rejection hanging in the air between them. Later, as the party wound down, Frank found himself helping the staff clean up, an automatic response from a man who had always believed in leaving places better than he found them. He was gathering discarded napkins when Rebecca approached, her professional smile in place. "You didn't have to do that, Dad," she said, gesturing to his cleanup efforts. "That's what we paid the venue staff for." Frank nodded, straightening up. "Force of habit, I guess." Rebecca glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Look, about the compass. I appreciate the thought, but you know, at my level, appearances matter. My colleagues expect certain things. And I embarrassed you," Frank finished quietly, the truth landing heavy between them. Rebecca had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant. It's just, you know, I'm up for partnership at the firm. Everything reflects on that, even birthday gifts." She paused, then added with what she clearly thought was kindness, "Next year, maybe we could go in on something together, you, Jason, and Melissa. That way you wouldn't have to, you know, be too poor for a real gift." Frank completed her thought, the words escaping before he could filter them. Rebecca flinched, then composed herself. "Dad, that's not fair. I'm just trying to be practical. I know things have been tight since the divorce, and I worry about you." But Frank had heard what he hadn't been meant to hear, the dismissal in her voice when she'd opened his gift, the subtle distancing in front of her colleagues, the careful management of his presence at her celebration. And now, this conversation. That wasn't truly about concern for him, but about managing how his financial situation reflected on her. "I understand, Rebecca," he said finally, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "I should get going. Early shift tomorrow." The drive back to his small apartment was quiet, Portland's spring rain having intensified to match his mood. Frank thought about the trajectory that had brought them here, his decades working maintenance and repair jobs to support Maria's nursing career and the children's education, the gradual drift in his marriage as Maria's professional circle expanded, while his remained rooted in blue-collar reality, the eventual separation that had left him starting over at 53. He had never regretted prioritizing his family's needs over his own advancement. When Rebecca had been accepted to that prestigious architecture program, he'd taken on extra weekend work without hesitation. When Jason needed braces, Frank had delayed replacing his failing truck. The children's education funds had been sacred, even as his own retirement savings remained minimal. What hurt wasn't Rebecca's success. He was immensely proud of what she had accomplished. What cut deep was her apparent shame of him, of the very sacrifices that had helped make her success possible. As Frank unlocked the door to his modest apartment, the compass he'd given Rebecca sat on his kitchen table, returned via Jason with an apologetic text message. "She asked me to give this back to you. Said it didn't match her aesthetic. I'm sorry, Dad." Frank picked up the compass, feeling its weight in his palm. The needle swung faithfully to north, exactly as it was designed to do. Dependable. Consistent. True to its purpose. Something shifted in Frank's mind as he stood there, the rain pattering against his single kitchen window. A determination began to take root, not born of resentment but of a deeper need to be seen, truly seen, by the daughter who had seemingly forgotten who had helped her find her way. The next morning, Frank called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of reporting to his maintenance supervisor job, he sat at his small kitchen table with his laptop open, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him as he logged into his bank account. The numbers weren't impressive. His savings were modest, the result of careful frugality rather than substantial income. His retirement fund was concerning for a man approaching 60. But there was one figure that gave him pause, a separate account he'd maintained for decades, funded by the side. Jobs he took on weekends and holidays. The quiet reserve he never touched, even in the most difficult months after the divorce. It wasn't a fortune by any measure, but it was substantial enough to represent 20 years of sacrificed weekends, skipped vacations, and deferred dreams. Frank had never had a specific purpose for this money, it had been his only financial security, his emergency fund, his eventual retirement supplement. But now, staring at the balance, a different possibility began to take shape. Frank opened a new browser tab and typed in a search, Morgan Family Home 1456, Oakwood Drive, Portland. The house where Rebecca and Jason had grown up, where Frank had taught them to ride bikes in the driveway and built the treehouse that had been Rebecca's childhood sanctuary. The home he had signed over to Maria in the divorce, wanting to disrupt the children's lives as little as possible. The search results surprised him. The house was listed for sale. Recently listed, in fact. Frank clicked through to the real estate listing, his heart rate accelerating as he scrolled through photos of the place he had once called home. Maria had updated the kitchen, something she'd always wanted to do. The living room had been painted a fashionable gray, replacing the warm yellow Frank had applied himself 15 years ago. But the bones of the house remained the same, the wide front porch where they'd gathered on summer evenings, the large backyard where Rebecca had drafted her first architectural plans for elaborate forts. The listing price made Frank wince. Portland's real estate market had exploded in recent years, transforming once affordable family neighborhoods into sought-after areas with price tags to match. The modest three-bedroom home they had purchased for $210,000 25 years ago was now listed at just over $750,000. Frank sat back, rubbing his hand across his face. The idea forming in his mind was financially reckless, emotionally complicated, and potentially transformative. He picked up his phone and called the one person who might understand. "Dad? Everything okay?" Jason's voice carried concern. "Frank. Rarely called during work hours. I need your perspective on something," Frank said. "Do you know Mom's selling the house?" The pause on the other end confirmed Jason was aware. "Yeah, she mentioned it last month. She's moving to Arizona with Richard. Warmer climate for her arthritis, she says." "I thought you knew." Frank hadn't known, but he pushed past the twinge of being out of the information loop. "How does Rebecca feel about it?" Jason's sigh was audible. "Actually, she's pretty upset. She won't admit it, but I can tell. She's been dropping by the house a lot, taking photos, being weirdly nostalgic. I think for all her success and forward momentum, the idea of strangers living in our childhood home is hitting her hard." Something clicked into place for Frank. "And she doesn't have the liquidity to buy it herself right now, does she? Not with that downtown condo mortgage." "How did you?" "No, she doesn't. She actually looked into it, but with the partnership buy-in coming up at her firm, she's cash poor at the moment, despite appearances." Jason paused. "Dad, what are you thinking?" Frank gazed at the compass sitting on his table, its needle pointing steadily north. "I'm thinking it's time I gave Rebecca a gift that can't be dismissed." Over the next 3 weeks, Frank Morgan orchestrated the most financially significant and emotionally charged decision of his life. He met with his bank, liquidated his emergency fund, spoke with a financial advisor who strongly cautioned against what he was planning, and reached out to a mortgage broker who was skeptical but ultimately supportive once Frank laid out his complete financial picture. The maintenance business had taught Frank the value of thorough inspection, so he hired the best home inspector in Portland to examine the Oakwood Drive property, relieved to discover that while the house needed some updates to the electrical system and roof, its foundation and structure remained sound. Maria had always been meticulous about maintenance, even after the divorce. Frank's offer on the house came in slightly below asking price, with a letter attached explaining his connection to the property. The competing bid was higher, but Frank's letter, and Maria's quiet intervention with the listing agent, tipped the scales in his favor. When the acceptance came through, Frank experienced a dizzying mixture of elation and terror. He had committed virtually every financial resource he had to this gesture, this reclaiming of family history, this statement to his daughter that he was not, in fact, too poor for a real gift. During this process, Frank maintained his regular work schedule, shared normal if somewhat distracted conversations with his children during their routine check-ins, and told no one except his financial advisor and the mortgage broker what he was planning. Even Maria, when she called to confirm she'd spoken to the listing agent, seemed uncertain about his motivations. "Frank, are you sure about this?" she'd asked, her voice carrying the concern of someone who had shared 25 years of marriage. Despite their eventual incompatibility. It's a lot. Financially, emotionally. Are you doing this to prove something? Maybe, Frank had admitted. But not what you might think. The closing date was set for May 15th, exactly 1 month after Rebecca's birthday party. Frank scheduled the signing for early morning, taking a rare full day off work to handle the paperwork and receive the keys, his keys, once again, to the home on Oakwood Drive. Walking through the empty house that afternoon was a surreal experience. Maria had moved out the week before, taking with her the furniture and decorations from her post-divorce life there. The rooms echoed with memories, Rebecca learning to walk in the living room, Jason's height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, family dinners and holiday gatherings and quiet Sunday mornings. Frank spent the day reacquainting himself with the space, measuring windows for repairs, testing faucets, and making notes of improvements needed. By evening, he had filled 3 pages of his worn notebook with projects and plans. He ordered a simple dinner from the Thai restaurant that had been a family favorite, eating it cross-legged on the floor of what had once been his bedroom, watching the sunset through windows that needed washing. Then he made the call that would set everything in motion. Rebecca Morgan, his daughter, answered crisply, her work voice professional and slightly distant. "Becca, it's Dad," Frank said, suddenly nervous despite weeks of planning. "I was wondering if you might stop by the old house on Oakwood tomorrow after work. I need your professional opinion on something." The pause that followed was heavy with confusion. "The Oakwood house? Dad, Mom sold that house. The new owners are moving in soon. Just trust me on this," Frank replied, trying to keep his voice casual. "Around 6? I'll bring coffee." Rebecca's hesitation was palpable, but her curiosity won out. "Okay, but I don't understand what you're doing there or why you need my opinion." "Tomorrow at 6, Frank repeated. "And Rebecca? Bring your compass." He ended the call before she could question him further, heart pounding with anticipation and uncertainty. For the first time in decades, Frank Morgan had made a decision that prioritized his own need for recognition over practical considerations. He had no idea how Rebecca would react, but the compass on the floor beside him pointed steadily north, and Frank felt, finally, that he was heading in the right direction. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Frank had taken another day off work, using precious vacation time to prepare for Rebecca's arrival. He spent the morning cleaning windows and sweeping floors, the afternoon meeting with a contractor about the roof repairs, and the final hour before his daughter's expected arrival setting up the single piece of furniture he'd brought to the house, a small table with 2 chairs, positioned in the bay window of the living room, where the evening light cast a warm glow across the hardwood floors. At precisely 6 o'clock, Frank heard the sound of Rebecca's car pulling into the driveway. He watched through the freshly cleaned window as she emerged, looking puzzled and slightly annoyed, dressed in her work clothes, a tailored suit that spoke of corner offices and important meetings. She carried her leather portfolio and, to Frank's satisfaction, the small box containing the compass. Frank opened the front door before she could knock. "Dad," Rebecca said, confusion evident in her voice. "What are you doing here? How did you even get in? This is technically trespassing, you know." Frank smiled, feeling suddenly calm despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "It's not trespassing when you own the property, Becca." Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "Come in," Frank said, stepping aside to let her enter. "I have something to show you." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped into the empty foyer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors that Frank had installed himself 20 years ago. He led her to the small table by the bay window, where he had placed a folder containing the closing documents, deed, and mortgage papers. "Sit down, please," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Rebecca complied, her professional composure slipping as she glanced around the empty house that had once been her childhood home. "Dad, you're scaring me a little. What's going on? Why are we in Mom's house?" "It's not Mom's house anymore," Frank said quietly, sitting across from her. "She sold it last week." "I know," Rebecca replied, an unexpected edge of emotion in her voice. "She's moving to Arizona with Richard. Jason told me they accepted an offer. Some young tech couple, apparently." Frank pushed the folder toward her. "Open it." With a puzzled frown, Rebecca flipped open the folder. Frank watched as her eyes scanned the documents, widening as comprehension slowly dawned. She looked up, her expression a complex mixture of shock, confusion, and something Frank couldn't quite read. "You bought the house," she whispered. "How? When? Why?" Frank took a deep breath. "The how is complicated. I liquidated my savings. Took out a mortgage that will probably mean I'm working well into my 70s, and leveraged pretty much everything I have. The when was yesterday morning. But the why, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Rebecca was shaking her head, still processing. "Dad, this house costs over $700,000. You're a maintenance supervisor. You live in a one-bedroom apartment. You can't afford this. Actually, I can, Frank said, his voice steady. Just barely, with some sacrifices, but I can. I've been putting away money from side jobs for 20 years. I've lived simply. And my credit is excellent. But why? Rebecca pressed, genuine bewilderment in her eyes. Why would you do this? Frank reached across the table and picked up the compass box that Rebecca had set down. He opened it, removing the brass instrument and placing it between them. At your birthday party, you said something that's been echoing in my head ever since. You implied I was too poor for a real gift. Frank held up his hand as Rebecca started to protest. You might not have meant it exactly that way, but that's what it felt like. And maybe you were right, in a sense. I couldn't afford the designer gifts your friends gave you. I couldn't compete with expensive vacations or luxury items. Frank tapped the compass gently. But that made me start thinking about what I could give you that would matter. Something no one else could give. Something that would help you find your way back to understanding who I am, who we are as a family. Rebecca was silent, her professional facade completely gone now, replaced by the vulnerable expression Frank remembered from when she was younger, when the world sometimes overwhelmed her despite her determination to conquer it. This house, Frank continued, is the compass of our family history. It's where you drew your first building designs on the kitchen table. It's where you and Jason grew up, where we celebrated holidays and weathered difficult times. It's the physical embodiment of what's always been most important to me, not wealth or status, but creating a foundation for my children to build their lives upon. So you bought it, for me? Rebecca asked, her voice small. Frank shook his head. I bought it for us. For our family. I bought it because I wanted you to understand that being poor is relative, Rebecca. By some measures, the ones you and your colleagues might use, yes, I don't have much. But by others? By the measure of what I've been able to give my children, by the foundation I helped build for your future? I'm wealthy beyond counting. He reached across the table and took her hand. I didn't buy this house to make you feel guilty or to prove something to your friends. I bought it to remind you, and maybe myself, that the most valuable gifts aren't the ones with the highest price tags. They're the ones that carry our history, our love, our shared understanding of what really matters. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, something Frank hadn't seen since her college graduation day. Dad, I can't believe you did this. It's financially irresponsible and completely unexpected and absolutely the most real gift I could give you. Frank finished softly. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was thick with emotion. I was horrible at my party. The compass was thoughtful and personal and I dismissed it because I was worried about what my colleagues would think. I've been so focused on appearances, on moving up, on being seen a certain way. You've been focused on building your future, Frank corrected gently. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, Rebecca. I just wanted to make sure you remembered where you started, and who helped you chart your course. Rebecca looked around the empty living room, her eyes lingering on the bay window where she had once built blanket forts, the archway where her height had been marked in pencil, the stairs she had descended in her prom dress while Frank took photos with tears in his eyes. What happens now? She asked finally, turning back to him. You're going to live here? Frank nodded. That's the plan. There's some work to be done, the roof needs attention, the electrical could use updating. I thought I might convert the garage into a workshop, maybe rent out the basement apartment to help with the mortgage. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying the compass that still sat between them on the table. Then she straightened her shoulders, a familiar determination settling over her features. I'd like to help, she said firmly. With the renovations. I am an architect, after all. And the basement conversion, that should be done properly, with permits and professional designs. I could handle that part. As a gift. The offer hung in the air between them, and Frank recognized it for what it was, not just practical assistance, but an olive branch, an acknowledgement of her earlier dismissal, a step toward rebuilding something that had been damaged. I'd like that, he said simply. Rebecca nodded, then reached for the folder of documents, flipping through them with newfound interest, her professional eye assessing what Frank had committed himself to. These terms aren't bad, but we should talk to my financial advisor about refinancing options after the initial period. And there are tax considerations we should review. Frank smiled at the unconscious inclusion that represented a subtle but significant shift. His daughter, the successful architect, was bringing her expertise to his project, treating him as a partner rather than someone to be managed or accommodated. As the evening light faded, father and daughter sat in the empty house on Oakwood Drive, the compass between them, planning renovations and discussing mortgage terms. It wasn't a conventional reconciliation scene with tearful apologies and dramatic embraces. It was something more authentic to who they were, practical people, finding their way back to mutual respect through shared purpose and renewed understanding. Later, as they locked up the house and stood on the front porch that had witnessed 2 decades of family comings and goings, Rebecca turned to Frank with an expression he hadn't seen in years, open, vulnerable, reminiscent of the girl who had once believed her father could fix anything. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm sorry about the compass. About what I said. I've lost my way a little, I think." Frank smiled, placing his hand on her shoulder. "That's why you have the compass, Becca. To help you find your way back." As they walked to their respective cars, Rebecca paused by her sleek European sedan. "Jason and Melissa should come over this weekend. We could start planning the renovations together. Maybe order from that Thai place down the street?" The casual invitation carried weight far beyond its surface meaning. It was an acknowledgement of family bonds, a step toward rebuilding what had been strained, a recognition of the home's significance to all of them. "I'd like that," Frank said simply. Driving back to his apartment, temporary housing now, until the renovations made the Oakwood house truly livable again, Frank felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had taken a financial risk that would shape the remainder of his working life. He had stretched his resources to their absolute limit. By conventional wisdom, what he had done was imprudent, possibly even foolish. But as the compass had shown him, sometimes the truest direction wasn't the most obvious one. Sometimes finding your way meant taking the path that others couldn't understand. Sometimes the most valuable gift wasn't the most expensive, but the one that reminded you of who you truly were and where you had come from. Frank Morgan wasn't a wealthy man by Portland's professional standards. He couldn't compete with designer labels or luxury experiences. But he had given his daughter something no one else could: the physical foundation of her childhood, the tangible connection to her past, the concrete reminder of what really constituted wealth in a family. As he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building for what would be one of his final nights there, Frank glanced at the small brass compass sitting on his passenger seat. Rebecca had pressed it back into his hands as they parted. "Keep it for now," she had said. "I think you've proven you know how to find true north better than I do." Frank picked up the compass, watching as the needle swung faithfully to point the way. Some instruments never lost their purpose, never failed in their fundamental function, regardless of who valued them or how they were perceived. Some gifts, it seemed, found their meaning not in the moment they were given, but in the journey that followed. The weekend arrived with a sense of anticipation Frank hadn't experienced in years. He spent Saturday morning at his apartment, packing essentials and sorting through belongings accumulated over 5 years of post-divorce life. Each item required a decision, necessary for the renovation period ahead, worth moving to the Oakwood house permanently, or better donated to someone who needed it more. By noon, his Ford F-150 was loaded with tools, clothes, and the few pieces of furniture he couldn't part with. The rest would stay in the apartment until the lease ended in 3 months, a financial cushion Frank couldn't afford to abandon despite his eagerness to fully commit to his new path. As he drove across Portland toward the familiar streets of his old neighborhood, Frank found himself reflecting on Rebecca's unexpected phone call the previous night. "Dad," she had said without preamble, "I've been thinking about the house." Frank had braced himself, wondering if his daughter's initial emotional response had given way to practical concerns about his financial decision. "I've drafted some preliminary renovation plans," she continued, her voice carrying the focused energy she brought to professional projects. "Nothing major, respecting the original character while updating systems and improving flow. I'd like to present them tomorrow, if that's okay." The shift had been subtle but significant, from skepticism about his purchase to collaborative planning, from judgment of his financial capacity to offering her professional expertise. It was, Frank realized, Rebecca's way of accepting his gesture, without directly addressing the deeper emotional currents that had necessitated it. "That sounds great, Becca," he had replied, recognizing this offering for what it was, her first step toward reconciliation. Now, as Frank pulled into the driveway of the Oakwood house, his house again, though in a very different context, he spotted Rebecca's car already parked at the curb. She wasn't alone. Jason's practical SUV sat behind hers, and beside it, a truck Frank didn't recognize, loaded with what appeared to be construction materials. The front door stood open, voices drifting out into the spring afternoon. Frank climbed the familiar steps of the porch, feeling like both a returning owner and an uncertain visitor. "Hello," he called, stepping into the foyer. "In the kitchen, Dad." Jason's voice responded. Frank followed the sound, moving through the empty living room into the kitchen that had once been the heart of their family home. The scene that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Rebecca stood at a folding table that had been set up under the window, architectural drawings spread across its surface. Jason and Melissa were unpacking grocery bags onto the countertops. And a third man, tall, solidly built, with the weathered hands of someone familiar with physical labor, was measuring the doorframe between kitchen and dining room. "Dad," Rebecca said, looking up with an expression that mixed determination and vulnerability. "This is Connor. He's my firm's head of construction. He's offered to consult on the renovation." Connor extended his hand with a firm grip and direct gaze. "Mr. Morgan. Rebecca's told me about your project. Impressive undertaking." Frank shook the offered hand, noting the respect in the younger man's eyes, not the condescension he had sometimes encountered from Rebecca's professional colleagues, but genuine appreciation from someone who understood the value of creating something lasting. "Connor's agreed to help us develop a proper renovation timeline," Rebecca explained. "And to connect us with reputable subcontractors for the specialized work. At contractor rates, not retail," Connor added. "I've got a network of people who do quality work without the markup you'd get hiring them directly." Frank absorbed this unexpected development, recognizing it as another piece of Rebecca's unspoken apology, leveraging her professional connections to ease the financial burden of his decision. "That's very generous," Frank said, directing the comment to both Rebecca and Connor. "It's practical," Rebecca replied with a shrug that didn't quite disguise the importance of this gesture. "The house deserves to be renovated properly." "And we brought lunch," Jason interjected, ever the peacemaker, holding up a bag from the local deli that had been a family favorite. "Figured we might as well make a day of it." Over sandwiches eaten picnic-style on the kitchen floor, the family began what would become their new normal, a collaborative planning process that bridged their different perspectives and experiences. Rebecca outlined her vision for updating the house while preserving its character, her architect's eye balancing aesthetics with functionality. Jason, who had inherited Frank's practical nature, asked questions about budget and timeline. Melissa, a kindergarten teacher with an artist sensibility, suggested color schemes and storage solutions. Frank listened more than he spoke, watching his children engage with the house, their childhood home, with adult perspectives. There was something profoundly moving about seeing Rebecca apply her professional expertise to the place where she had first discovered her passion for design. About watching Jason's thoughtful consideration of practical details in the rooms where Frank had taught him basic home repairs. "The roof is the priority," Frank said when there was a natural pause in the conversation. "Inspector said it's got maybe 2 years left, less if we get heavy winter storms." Connor nodded. "Smart. Always start from the top down with renovations. Protect the envelope first, then work on interiors. The electrical needs updating too," Frank continued. "Original wiring in some sections, not enough capacity for modern needs." "I know someone for that," Connor offered. "Former military electrician, does solid work at fair prices. He owes me a favor." As the afternoon progressed, what had begun as a simple lunch evolved into a full family planning session. Connor measured and assessed, offering professional insights without overshadowing Frank's authority as the homeowner. Rebecca sketched modifications to her original plans based on her father's priorities. Jason and Melissa volunteered to help with demolition work the following weekend. By evening, the empty house felt different, no longer just a physical structure Frank had impulsively purchased, but the beginning of a family project that was already changing the dynamics between them. As they were packing up to leave, Rebecca pulled Frank aside, her expression more open than it had been in years. "Dad," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said. About being poor being relative." She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "I think I've been measuring wealth wrong. Not just with you, but in my own life." Frank waited, sensing she needed to find her own words for what she was realizing. "I've been so focused on the partnership at the firm, on impressing people who measure success by square footage and car models." Rebecca glanced around the empty kitchen, her expression softening. "But being here today, working on this house together, it reminded me of what actually feels valuable." "It's easy to lose sight of that," Frank said gently. "Especially when you're building a career as impressive as yours." Rebecca met his eyes directly. The compass was a perfect gift. "I was too caught up in appearances to see it." The acknowledgement hung between them, simple but profound. Frank nodded, accepting this offering for what it was, not just an apology, but a recognition of the values he had tried to instill in his children. "We start work on the roof next Saturday?" he asked, giving her an opportunity to move past the emotional moment. Rebecca's smile showed relief and determination. "Jason and I will be here at 8. Melissa's bringing breakfast. Connor's arranged for materials delivery on Friday." She paused, then added, "I'll bring coffee. The good kind, from that place on Hawthorne you always said was overpriced." It was a small joke, an acknowledgement of the financial differences that had created distance between them, now offered as a point of connection rather than division. Looking forward to it, Frank replied simply. As the following weeks unfolded, the renovation of the Oakwood house became a ritual that gradually rebuilt not just the physical structure, but the family bonds that had frayed over years of subtle misunderstandings and diverging paths. Every Saturday, they gathered early: Frank, Rebecca, Jason, and Melissa, joined occasionally by Connor and various subcontractors. The roof replacement came first, a multi-weekend project that saw Rebecca climbing ladders alongside her father, her architect's precision complementing his practical experience. "Hand me that pry bar," Frank called one Saturday morning, carefully removing damaged shingles from the northwest corner of the roof. Rebecca passed the tool up, then climbed the ladder to join him, dressed in work clothes that were a far cry from her usual tailored office attire. "The water damage looks worse than we thought," she observed, kneeling beside him to examine the exposed decking. "Always does," Frank nodded. "Nature finds every weakness eventually." Rebecca studied her father's methodical work, the careful way he assessed damage and preserved what was still sound. "You've always been good at this," she said. "Seeing what can be saved, what needs to be replaced." The observation carried weight beyond the immediate task, and Frank glanced at his daughter, noting how the morning sun highlighted the features she had inherited from her mother, the determined set of her jaw, the analytical focus in her eyes. "Maintenance work teaches you to evaluate honestly," he replied. "No benefit in preserving what's fundamentally compromised, no sense in replacing what still has good years left." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of their movements becoming synchronized as they removed damaged materials and prepared the surface for new protective layers. "I've been thinking about wealth," Rebecca said suddenly. "Securing a section of weatherproofing membrane. Real wealth, I mean." Frank waited, giving her space to continue. "All those hours I've spent in design meetings for multi-million-dollar homes, focusing on imported marble and custom fixtures." She shook her head. "And here we are, rebuilding the most basic protective layer of a house, and it feels more meaningful than any of those luxury projects." "There's satisfaction in necessary work," Frank agreed. "In creating something that serves its purpose well." Rebecca nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think I lost sight of that. Got caught up in the prestige projects, the high-end clients, the portfolio pieces that would impress my colleagues." "That's not surprising," Frank said gently. "Success tends to create its own momentum." "But at what cost?" Rebecca asked, more to herself than to her father. "I look at my condo, all that expensive furniture, the art I bought because my interior designer said it was important, the kitchen I never cook in, and I wonder if I've been building the wrong kind of wealth." The conversation might have continued, but Jason called up from below, asking for help with measuring new flashing for the chimney. The moment passed, but Frank carried his daughter's words with him throughout the day, recognizing them as evidence of a deeper transformation than he had anticipated when he purchased the house. As May turned to June, the renovation progressed steadily. The roof was completed, securing the house against the elements. The electrical system was updated by Connor's military friend, who refused payment beyond materials cost after learning the story behind Frank's purchase. Weekday evenings often found Frank working alone, tackling the endless small repairs that an older home required, but weekends remained family time, with shared labor followed by takeout meals eaten on the back porch. One such Saturday evening in late June, as they sat surrounded by the evidence of the day's work, paint samples for the living room arranged on pieces of drywall, carpet swatches spread across the floor, a new ceiling fan waiting to be installed, Jason raised the question that had been hovering unspoken in the background of their renovation project. "So, Dad," he began, his tone carefully casual, "once the house is finished, what's the plan? Will you be living here alone, or?" The question carried implications that made Frank pause, his sandwich halfway to his mouth. He had been so focused on the renovation, on the immediate goal of making the house livable again, that he had given little thought to the longer-term future. "I hadn't really thought beyond getting the place habitable," he admitted. "But yes, I suppose I will be living here alone, at least initially." Rebecca exchanged a glance with Jason that Frank couldn't quite interpret. "The thing is," she said carefully, "we've been talking, Jason, Melissa, and I. And we have a proposition for you." Frank set down his sandwich, giving his full attention to his daughter, who suddenly seemed nervous in a way he hadn't seen since she was a teenager asking to borrow the car. "The basement apartment conversion we've been planning," Rebecca continued. "We were thinking it could be more than just rental income. It could be, well, it could be my place." Frank blinked in surprise. "Your place? You mean you'd live here? What about your condo?" "I'd keep the condo for now," Rebecca explained. It's a good investment, and I could rent it out for more than my mortgage payment. But yes, I'd live here. She hesitated, then added with unusual vulnerability. If you'd be okay with that. Before Frank could respond, Jason jumped in. And Melissa and I were thinking about the third bedroom upstairs. It's small for both of us long term, but we've been wanting to save for a house of our own, and our apartment rent is making that almost impossible. You too? Frank looked between his children, trying to process this unexpected development. Both of you want to move back to the family home? Not permanently, Rebecca clarified quickly. For me, it would be a chance to save aggressively for a year or two. The partnership buy-in is substantial, and living here would help me reach that goal faster. And for us, Melissa added, speaking up for the first time, it would be a stepping stone. A chance to build our down payment fund while helping with the renovation. Plus, she glanced at Jason, who nodded encouragement. We've been talking about starting a family soon, and having Grandpa in the same house for that first year would be pretty wonderful. The mention of potential grandchildren shifted something in Frank's chest, a tightening of emotion he hadn't anticipated. The house on Oakwood Drive, which he had purchased as a statement about his worth, as a gift his daughter couldn't dismiss, was evolving into something far more significant, a multi-generational family home, a place for new beginnings rooted in shared history. We'd contribute to the mortgage, of course, Rebecca added hurriedly, misinterpreting his silence as hesitation. And to the utilities and maintenance costs. It would be a formal arrangement, with proper agreements. And we'd respect your space, Jason assured him. You'd have the master suite and main floor. Rebecca would have her own entrance to the basement apartment. We'd share the kitchen and living areas by mutual agreement. Frank looked at his children, Rebecca with her careful planning, Jason with his earnest practicality, both of them offering something he had never expected, a chance to rebuild not just a house, but a family unit, adapted for their adult relationships. But grounded in the connection that had always been his greatest source of meaning. Well, he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended, I guess we'd better focus on getting those spaces ready, then. The smiles that broke across his children's faces were worth every penny of the mortgage that would keep him working. Well past the age when many of his peers were retiring. Worth every hour of labor still ahead. Worth every sacrifice that had led to this moment. As the evening wound down and his children prepared to leave, Frank found himself standing alone in what would be his bedroom, looking out at the backyard where Rebecca and Jason had played as children. The tree that had held their swing still stood, though the rope had been removed years ago. The flower beds Maria had tended so carefully needed attention, but the structure of her garden design remained visible. Frank thought about the compass he had given Rebecca, about true north and finding one's way through changing landscapes. He had purchased this house believing he was teaching his daughter about the nature of real wealth, about the value of history and sacrifice. Now, standing in the quiet of a home that would soon be filled with 3 generations of his family, Frank realized he was the one being taught about the unexpected ways that bold gestures could reshape not just perceptions, but realities. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, having returned from her car with a folder of renovation plans. I forgot to show you the updated drawings for the kitchen, she said, then paused, noting his reflective expression. Everything okay, Dad? Frank turned from the window, taking in the sight of his accomplished daughter standing in the doorway of his bedroom in the house that had shaped them both. Everything's better than okay, he said simply. I think we're all finding our way home. Rebecca's smile carried understanding beyond words. She stepped into the room and placed the folder on the dresser, then moved to stand beside her father. At the window. Remember when you built us that swing? She asked, nodding toward the oak tree. You were 7, Frank nodded. Jason was 4. You wanted to go higher than any swing at the park. And you made it happen, Rebecca said softly. Just like you always did. Creating something solid that would hold us safely while we reached for the sky. The metaphor wasn't lost on Frank, who had spent his life providing the secure foundation from which his children could launch their ambitions. What he hadn't anticipated was that the foundation he'd built would become a place they would choose to return to, not from failure or necessity, but from recognition of its enduring value. The thing about homes, Frank said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders, is that they're never really finished. There's always another improvement to make, another system to update, another adaptation to changing needs. Is that the maintenance supervisor talking? Rebecca asked with a smile. Maybe, Frank acknowledged. But it's also the father. Family homes are living things, Becca. They grow and change with the people who inhabit them. Rebecca leaned into her father's side, the gesture reminiscent of her childhood but carrying the weight of adult understanding. I think I needed to leave to understand what this place really meant, she said quietly. To recognize what you built here, and I don't mean just the structure. As the evening light faded over the backyard that had witnessed so many chapters of their family story, father and daughter stood together in comfortable silence, looking toward a future neither had imagined when Frank had made his impulsive, defiant purchase, a future where, too poor for a real gift, had transformed into wealth beyond measure, where a compass had indeed shown the way home. July brought Portland's characteristic summer warmth, transforming the Oakwood house into a hive of focused activity. The renovation had taken on new urgency with the decision that Rebecca, Jason, and Melissa would all be moving in by September. What had begun as Frank's solitary project had evolved into a family enterprise with a firm deadline and expanding scope. The basement apartment conversion for Rebecca became a showcase for her architectural talents. Working evenings and weekends, she designed a space that respected the home's historical character while incorporating modern amenities and sustainable features. The separate entrance, once a simple basement door, was reimagined as a private, garden-level entry with a small patio sheltered by native plantings. "What do you think about radiant floor heating?" she asked Frank one evening as they reviewed the basement plans spread across sawhorses in what would become her living area. "It's an upfront investment, but the energy savings over time are substantial." Frank studied the specifications, mentally calculating costs against his already stretched budget. "It's a lot more than traditional baseboard heating." Rebecca nodded, acknowledging the financial reality without dismissing it. "I'd cover the difference," she said, the offer made simply, without the defensiveness that might once have accompanied it. "Consider it my contribution to increasing the home's long-term value." This pattern repeated throughout the renovation, Rebecca offering upgrades that balanced quality with sustainability, Frank weighing immediate costs against future benefits. Both of them finding compromise that honored his financial limitations without sacrificing thoughtful design. Their professional skills complemented each other in unexpected ways, her architectural vision enhanced by his practical knowledge of systems and materials. Meanwhile, Jason and Melissa focused on transforming the small upstairs bedroom into a space that could accommodate them comfortably while they saved for their own home. With Melissa's teacher's eye for organization and Jason's inheritance of his father's handyman abilities, they maximized every square inch, building custom storage solutions that turned the modest room into a model of efficiency. "Dad, what do you think about taking out this closet wall?" Jason asked one Saturday, tapping the partition between the bedroom closet and the adjacent bathroom. "If we removed it and reconfigured the bathroom slightly, we could create a walk-through closet that would give us nearly double the storage space." Frank examined the wall, checking for electrical lines and plumbing considerations. "It's not load-bearing," he confirmed. "We'd need to reroute that outlet and patch the flooring. But it's doable." "I'll draw up the plans," Rebecca offered from the doorway, where she'd been listening. "We could maximize the bathroom functionality at the same time. That pedestal sink is charming but impractical for two people." "Thanks, sis," Jason said. With genuine appreciation, the sibling relationship that had sometimes been strained by their different life paths finding new equilibrium through shared purpose. What struck Frank most as the weeks passed was how the renovation had become a canvas for each family member's strengths. Rebecca's professional expertise gave the project architectural integrity. Jason's methodical approach to problem-solving kept them on schedule. Melissa's artistic sensibility influenced color choices and finishing details. And Frank's lifetime of maintenance experience provided the practical foundation that tied all their efforts together. By early August, the major structural work was complete. The roof no longer leaked, the electrical system had been fully updated, the plumbing now functioned flawlessly, and the basement conversion was taking shape with impressive speed thanks to Connor's continued involvement and the network of skilled tradespeople he had introduced to the family. It was during this phase of the renovation, as they transitioned from structural necessities to aesthetic choices, that Frank noticed a significant shift in Rebecca's engagement with the project. His daughter, who had built her career on high-end design for wealthy clients, became increasingly passionate about finding creative solutions that balanced quality with affordability. "Look at these cabinet fronts," she said one evening, showing Frank samples she had sourced from a local woodworker who repurposed materials from demolished buildings. "They're crafted from old-growth fir salvaged from a 1920s warehouse downtown. The quality is extraordinary, and because he's using reclaimed materials, the cost is about half what new cabinets would be." Frank ran his hand over the smooth, richly grained wood, appreciating both its beauty and the story behind it. "They're beautiful, Becca. But I thought you were set on those Italian cabinets you showed me last week." Rebecca shook her head, surprising him with her response. "I've been rethinking a lot of those initial choices. The Italian design was impressive, but there's something more authentic about using materials with local history, crafted by someone who lives in our community." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I think I've been designing too long for people who want to showcase their wealth rather than create homes that reflect genuine value. The observation hung between them, carrying implications about Rebecca's professional trajectory that went beyond cabinet selections for their renovation. Frank recognized it as part of a larger reassessment his daughter seemed to be undertaking, not just of the house, but of her own definitions of success and worth. This evolution became even more apparent when Rebecca invited Frank to her downtown condo one Sunday afternoon in mid-August. It was the first time he had visited her home since before her birthday, and he was struck by how different it felt walking into the sleek, minimalist space with its expansive views of the city and carefully curated furnishings. "Nice place," he commented, taking in the evidence of his daughter's financial success, the designer furniture, the impressive art collection, the high-end appliances and a kitchen that showed little sign of use. "It's a good investment," Rebecca replied with a shrug that suggested diminished emotional attachment. "Property in this building appreciates consistently." She led him to the dining table, where she had arranged several folders alongside a pot of coffee and the kind of artisanal pastries Frank would never purchase for himself. "I wanted to talk to you about some financial aspects of our arrangement," she began, unexpectedly formal after weeks of collaborative work on the house. "I've been meeting with my financial advisor about restructuring some investments." Frank felt a flicker of concern. "Is there a problem with your contribution to the house?" "If you're reconsidering moving in, no, nothing like that," Rebecca interrupted quickly. "Actually, the opposite. I've been looking at my overall financial picture and making some adjustments that I think make more sense for the long term." She opened the first folder, revealing spreadsheets and investment statements. "When I reviewed my portfolio with fresh eyes, I realized I've been following a very conventional path without questioning whether it actually aligned with my values." Frank listened as his daughter outlined changes she was making, divesting from certain high-return but ethically questionable investments, reallocating funds toward local businesses and sustainable ventures, and restructuring her retirement, planning to balance security with meaningful impact. "The thing is," Rebecca continued, reaching for the second folder, "these changes have made me think differently about our arrangement at the house. I initially proposed contributing to the mortgage as a tenant, but I'd like to suggest an alternative." She slid a document across the table, a proposal for co-ownership that would reduce Frank's financial burden while giving Rebecca an equity stake in the property. "This would decrease your monthly payment significantly," she explained, pointing to the figures she had calculated. "And it would give me a tangible investment in something I believe in, rather than just another financial asset." Frank studied the document, understanding that what his daughter was offering went beyond financial restructuring. This was Rebecca acknowledging the value of what he had created, choosing to invest in their shared history rather than just her individual future. "You've put a lot of thought into this," he said finally. Rebecca nodded, her expression more vulnerable than her professional demeanor typically allowed. "I've been thinking about what you said about being too poor for a real gift. About how wealth is relative and value is subjective." She gestured around her expensively furnished condo. "I realized I've been accumulating things that look impressive but don't actually bring me joy or reflect what matters to me. Meanwhile, every weekend I spend working on that old house with you and Jason and Melissa feels more meaningful than any professional achievement I've had in years." The admission clearly cost her something. Rebecca had built her identity around professional success and financial achievement, constructing a life that showcased her distance from the modest circumstances of her childhood. "I don't want you to think I'm not proud of what you've accomplished," Frank said carefully. "Your success is a testament to your talent and determination." "I know, Dad," Rebecca assured him. "And I'm not rejecting that success. I'm just reevaluating what success actually means to me." She took a deep breath before continuing. "The partnership vote at the firm is next month. If I get it, and the indicators are positive, I'll be the youngest partner in the firm's history." "That's incredible, Becca," Frank said with genuine pride. "You've earned it." "Yes, I have," she agreed. "But the partnership comes with expectations about the kinds of clients I'll pursue, the projects I'll prioritize, the image I'll maintain." She gestured toward the third folder, still unopened on the table. "Which brings me to the other thing I wanted to discuss with you." When she opened this final folder, Frank was surprised to see preliminary architectural drawings for what appeared to be modest, thoughtfully designed homes. "These are beautiful," he said, studying the plans that showcased efficient use of space, sustainable materials, and innovative energy systems. "New client projects?" Rebecca shook her head. "Not exactly. These are concepts I've been developing on my own time, affordable housing designs that prioritize quality, sustainability, and community integration without the luxury price tag." She turned to a page showing site plans for a small development. There's a parcel of land in northeast Portland that's been sitting vacant for years. The firm passed on it because the profit margins for conventional development there would be too slim, but I've been running numbers on a different approach: smaller footprints, shared green spaces, cooperative energy systems. Frank looked up from the drawings to find his daughter watching him with an expression that reminded him of her childhood, the way she would wait for his reaction to her earliest design efforts, pencil sketches of dream houses taped proudly to the refrigerator. "This is important to you," he observed. "It is," Rebecca confirmed. "I've spent years designing luxury spaces for people who already have more than they need. I'm good at it, and it's lucrative, but lately I've been asking myself if that's really the best use of what I know, of what I can do." She gathered the drawings together with careful hands. "If I make partner, I'll have more leverage to pursue projects like this, to advocate for the firm to consider developments that measure success not just in profit margins but in community impact." Frank recognized the significance of what his daughter was sharing, not just architectural plans, but a potential pivot in her professional identity, a realignment of her talents with deeper values. It was, he realized, the same transformation he had witnessed in smaller ways throughout the renovation process: Rebecca rediscovering purpose beyond prestige, meaning beyond material success. "I think you'd be exceptional at this," he said. Simply. "These designs show the same attention to detail you bring to your high-end projects, but with a more inclusive vision." Rebecca's relief was visible. She had clearly been uncertain about his reaction, perhaps expecting him to question the financial wisdom of potentially limiting her most profitable client base. "The funny thing is," she said with a small smile, "I probably wouldn't have considered this direction if you hadn't bought the house. Working on the renovation, finding creative solutions within real constraints rather than unlimited budgets, it reminded me why I became an architect in the first place. Not to create status symbols, but to design spaces that enhance people's lives, regardless of their financial position." As they continued discussing her plans, Frank marveled at how his impulsive, emotionally driven decision to purchase the family home had catalyzed changes he could never have anticipated. He had bought the house to make a statement about his worth, to give his daughter a gift she couldn't dismiss. Instead, the house was giving them all something far more valuable: a recalibration of priorities, a restoration of connections, a rediscovery of purpose. Later that afternoon, as they drove separately back to the Oakwood house for the family dinner that had become their Sunday tradition, Frank found himself reflecting on the compass that had started this journey. The antique instrument had been designed to help travelers find their way in unfamiliar territory, to orient themselves when landmarks disappeared and paths became unclear. In giving it to Rebecca, he had hoped to remind her of her roots, of the passion for exploration that had characterized her childhood. He couldn't have known then how prophetic that gift would prove to be, not just for Rebecca, but for all of them. The compass had indeed shown the way, not to a specific destination but to a process of reorientation, a collective finding of true north amid the competing signals of success and status that had drawn them in different directions. At the house, Jason and Melissa had already arrived, bringing the stone tile they had sourced for the upstairs bathroom renovation. The four of them gathered around the kitchen island, still the original countertop, now sanded and sealed rather than replaced with expensive granite as initially planned, sharing updates on their individual projects and coordinating the week's renovation schedule. "The plumber can install the basement shower on Wednesday," Jason reported, consulting the shared digital calendar they had created. "And the electrician will finish the recessed lighting on Thursday." "Perfect," Rebecca nodded. "The flooring crew is scheduled for Friday, which means I should be able to move the first furniture pieces in next weekend." "Already?" Frank asked, surprised by the accelerated timeline. "I thought we were targeting early September for move-in." "For full move-in, yes," Rebecca confirmed. "But I've decided to downsize significantly before relocating. Most of the condo furniture doesn't fit the aesthetic we're creating here, and honestly, I don't need all of it." Melissa looked up from the tile sample she was examining. "Are you selling your furniture?" "Some pieces," Rebecca said. "Others, I'm donating to a program that furnishes apartments for families transitioning out of homelessness." She smiled at their surprised expressions. "What?" "It's practical. They need quality furniture, and I need to stop surrounding myself with things I purchased more for show than function." The simple statement captured the transformation Frank had been observing in his daughter, a shift from external validation to internal alignment, from accumulation to intentionality. It wasn't that Rebecca was abandoning her success or rejecting the rewards of her hard work. Rather, she was redefining what those rewards should be, questioning the measures of achievement she had previously accepted without examination. As the evening progressed, their planning session evolved into a more relaxed family dinner, Thai takeout spread across the makeshift table they had constructed from sawhorses and plywood. The conversation flowed easily, moving from renovation details to workplace anecdotes to Melissa's stories about her kindergarten students. Looking around at his children, Rebecca gesturing animatedly as she described a challenging client meeting, Jason listening attentively while sketching a solution for a storage problem on a paper napkin, Melissa adding thoughtful questions that drew out deeper discussions. Frank felt a profound sense of fulfillment that transcended the physical reconstruction of the house. They were rebuilding something more fundamental than walls and rooflines. They were reconstructing their understanding of family, of value, of what constituted meaningful investment in one's life. The Oakwood house, which Frank had purchased, in a moment of wounded pride and parental determination, had become a crucible for transformation that none of them had anticipated. As the summer evening light filtered through windows that had witnessed 3 decades of their family history, Frank recognized that the true gift of the house wasn't the structure itself, but the process it had catalyzed, the recalibration of priorities, the restoration of respect, the rediscovery of what made each of them most authentically themselves. Rebecca caught his contemplative expression and paused in her story. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Frank looked at his daughter, this accomplished woman who had once dismissed him as too poor for a real gift, and was now redesigning her life around values they shared, and smiled. "I'm thinking that some investments pay dividends you never expect," he said simply. "And that the most valuable renovations aren't always visible from the outside." Rebecca held his gaze, understanding flowing between them without need for further explanation. She raised her water glass in a small toast. "To unexpected returns," she said softly. As Jason and Melissa joined the toast, Frank felt the compass in his pocket, the simple instrument he still carried as a reminder of where this journey had begun and how far they had already traveled together. Their renovation was far from complete, but the foundation had been restored, strengthened not just with new materials but with renewed understanding of what truly constituted wealth in a family's life. September arrived with a gentle transition. From summer to fall, bringing cooler mornings and the first hints of color to the maple trees lining Oakwood Drive. The renovation had reached its final stages, transforming the once empty house into a home that balanced modern functionality with respectful preservation of its original character. Moving day unfolded in stages, coordinated with the precision of a well-planned construction project. Rebecca was the first to relocate, her basement apartment having been completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule thanks to Connor's continued involvement and the efficient team of craftspeople he had assembled. "That's the last box," Frank announced, setting down a carefully labeled container of architectural books in Rebecca's new living room. The space was a testament to his daughter's design vision, clean lines and natural materials creating an atmosphere of calm sophistication without ostentation. Rebecca stood in the center of the room, taking in the results of their collective efforts. The basement that had once been unfinished storage space now featured polished concrete floors with radiant heating, walls painted in soft neutral tones, and strategically placed windows that maximized natural light while maintaining privacy. "It's perfect," she said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Better than I imagined." Frank watched as his daughter moved through the space, running her hand along the custom shelving built from reclaimed Douglas fir, adjusting the placement of a reading lamp beside the simple but elegant armchair that was one of the few pieces she had brought from her condo. "You've only brought about a third of your furniture," he observed. "Are you storing the rest?" Rebecca shook her head. "Most of it's gone already. The donation program took the bulk of it last week, and I sold a few key pieces to a designer who's furnishing a vacation rental." She smiled at Frank's surprised expression. "Turns out I don't need 3 sofas and 4 different dining tables to feel at home." The simplicity of her statement belied the significant shift it represented. Rebecca, who had once surrounded herself with expensive possessions that signaled her professional success, was consciously choosing a different path, not abandoning quality or aesthetics, but approaching them with new priorities that valued intention over impression. As they finished arranging the last of her belongings, Rebecca opened a bottle of wine she had been saving for this occasion. They sat together on her new back patio, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the Japanese maple Frank had planted as part of the landscaping renovation. "The partnership vote is tomorrow," Rebecca said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The managing partners have already indicated it's likely to be unanimous in my favor." "That's wonderful news," Frank said, genuinely proud of his daughter's professional achievement. "You've earned it, Becca." Rebecca nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. "I have. But I've been thinking about what that achievement really means, what I want to do with the influence it gives me." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, the same one containing her affordable housing concept designs that she had shown Frank weeks earlier. "I presented these to the executive committee last Friday. proposed that the firm establish a division focused on innovative community development projects. Frank's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's a bold move right before a partnership vote. It was, Rebecca acknowledged with a small smile. But if I'm going to be a partner, I want to shape the firm's direction, not just follow the established path. And surprisingly, the response was positive. Not unanimous enthusiasm, but genuine interest in exploring the potential, especially when I demonstrated how these projects could enhance the firm's reputation for cutting-edge sustainable design while expanding our client base. As she outlined the committee's response and her refined vision for this new direction in her career, Frank was struck by the confidence with which his daughter was charting this course, not the defensive ambition that had sometimes characterized her professional persona, but a grounded conviction rooted in authentic purpose. You know, he said when she paused, when I gave you that compass, I never imagined it would lead here. Rebecca laughed, the sound carrying across the small patio. To me, living in our old basement while pursuing affordable housing design? Yeah, probably not what you envisioned. No, Frank agreed with a smile. But watching you find your own true north, that's better than anything I could have hoped for. The conversation shifted to more practical matters, the schedule for Jason and Melissa's move the following weekend, plans for sharing the kitchen space, the remaining renovation projects that would continue through the fall. As they talked, Frank felt a deep sense of satisfaction that transcended the physical transformation of the house. His impulsive purchase, born of wounded pride and parental frustration, had catalyzed changes none of them could have anticipated. Jason and Melissa's relocation followed a week later, their carefully planned move bringing new energy to the upstairs level of the home. The small bedroom they had originally intended to occupy had been artfully expanded by removing non-structural walls and reconfiguring the adjacent bathroom, creating a suite that maximized the limited square footage through thoughtful design and built-in storage solutions. I can't believe this is the same space, Melissa marveled as they arranged the last of their belongings. The transformation was indeed remarkable. What had once been a cramped bedroom barely large enough for a double bed now featured a custom platform bed with integrated drawers, a compact but functional workspace, and a walk-through closet leading to a modernized bathroom. Rebecca's design, Dad's craftsmanship, and our sweat equity, Jason said, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. Pretty good combination. That evening, the four of them gathered for their first official family dinner as housemates. Frank had spent the afternoon preparing his signature lasagna, Maria's recipe with his own modifications, a dish that had been the centerpiece of family celebrations throughout the children's upbringing. The dining room table, recently restored, rather than replaced, was set with the simple stoneware dishes Frank had purchased during his first week of ownership. I think we need a toast, Jason said as they settled around the table. To the completion of Phase 1 of the Oakwood House restoration. And to new beginnings, Melissa added, her hand resting briefly on her stomach in a gesture that didn't escape Frank's notice. Rebecca caught it too, her eyes widening. Melissa? Jason? Do you have news? The young couple exchanged a glance filled with excitement and nervous anticipation. We were going to wait until after dinner, Jason said, but yes. We're expecting. Due in April. The announcement transformed the already celebratory dinner into something more profound, a marking not just of the home's restoration, but of the family's continuation. As congratulations flowed and questions about the pregnancy were answered, Frank found himself watching his children with a sense of wonder at how life cycles repeated and renewed themselves. Dad? Rebecca's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're quiet. Everything okay? Frank looked at the faces gathered around his table, Rebecca with her newfound sense of purpose, Jason and Melissa glowing with anticipation of parenthood, and felt a wave of emotion that caught him by surprise. Everything's perfect, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I'm just grateful. When I bought this house, I never imagined we'd be sitting here like this, planning for a new generation. The weeks that followed established new rhythms for the household. Each family member had private space, Frank in the master suite, Rebecca in her basement apartment, Jason and Melissa in their upstairs domain, but they shared the common areas with a surprising harmony. The kitchen became a gathering place. In the evenings, homework from Rebecca's professional projects or Melissa's teaching preparations spread across the island while Jason and Frank tackled the ongoing renovation tasks that still remained. October brought the completion of the kitchen renovation, a project that showcased their collaborative approach. Rebecca's design preserved the room's original footprint while updating systems and finishes. Frank's practical knowledge guided material selections that balanced quality with value. Jason's carpentry skills were evident in the custom cabinet modifications that maximized storage without requiring complete replacement. The result was a space that honored the home's history while meeting modern needs, original hardwood floors, carefully restored rather than replaced, cabinet frames refreshed with the reclaimed fur fronts Rebecca had sourced, countertops of durable butcher block instead of trendy stone. The overall effect was warm, functional, and unpretentious, a kitchen designed for actual cooking rather than magazine features. "This is officially my favorite room in the house," Melissa declared one Sunday evening as they prepared dinner together. "It actually feels like people live here, not like a showroom." Rebecca nodded agreement as she chopped vegetables for the salad. "That's what I've been trying to articulate to the partnership committee. Good design isn't about creating spaces that look impressive but remain unused. It's about enhancing how people actually live in their homes." "Speaking of the partnership," Frank said, looking up from the chicken he was seasoning, "how did the first official meeting go?" Rebecca's face brightened with genuine enthusiasm. "Better than expected. They've approved a pilot program for the Community Development Initiative. Small scale to start, just 2 projects next year, but with potential for expansion if we can demonstrate viability." "That's fantastic, Becca," Frank said, proud of his daughter's ability to translate her vision into reality. "Have you selected the sites?" "We're focusing on that northeast Portland parcel I mentioned," Rebecca explained, her professional confidence evident as she outlined the project parameters. "The zoning allows for a small cluster development, 6 units designed around a central green space, with shared amenities that reduce individual footprints while enhancing community interaction." As she detailed the innovative features of the planned development, rainwater collection systems, modular construction techniques that reduced waste, flexible interior spaces that could adapt to changing family needs, Frank was struck by how naturally his daughter had integrated her high-end design expertise with more inclusive values. "The most exciting part," Rebecca continued, setting aside the knife to reach for her ever-present notebook, "is that we've secured preliminary approval for a partnership with the city's first-time homebuyer program. 2 of the 6 units will be designated for families transitioning from rental assistance, with graduated ownership structures that make the mortgages manageable." "You're not just designing houses," Melissa observed, "you're reimagining how people become homeowners." "Exactly," Rebecca nodded, clearly appreciative of her sister-in-law's understanding. "The traditional model assumes everyone has access to substantial down payments and can qualify for conventional mortgages. But that excludes huge segments of the population, not just low-income families, but middle-income workers in essential professions, young families burdened by student loans, older adults on fixed incomes." The conversation continued through dinner, ranging from technical aspects of sustainable building methods to philosophical questions about community design. What struck Frank most was the integration he observed in his daughter, the seamless connection between her professional expertise and her evolving personal values, between the successful architect she had become and the socially conscious person she had perhaps always been beneath the ambition. Later that evening, after Jason and Melissa had retired to their upstairs suite, Frank found Rebecca still at the kitchen table, sketching modifications to one of her housing designs. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat across from her, watching her focused concentration with familiar paternal pride. "You know," he said after a comfortable silence, "watching you work on these designs reminds me of when you were little. You used to spread your papers across the same table, tongue caught between your teeth just like now, designing dream houses for your dolls." Rebecca looked up, smiling at the memory. "I'd forgotten that. Didn't I once design an underwater house with special tunnels for mermaids to visit? Complete with detailed cross-sections showing how the water would be kept out," Frank confirmed. "Your mother thought it was adorable. I thought it showed remarkable spatial reasoning for a 7-year-old. The mention of Maria brought a thoughtful expression to Rebecca's face. "Have you told Mom about all this? About the house, the renovation, us living here together?" Frank nodded. "We had a long phone call last month. She was surprised, of course, but supportive once I explained how it all evolved." "And about the baby? Does she know she's going to be a grandmother again?" "Jason called her right after they told us," Frank confirmed. "She's already planning a visit for after the birth." Rebecca tapped her pencil against her notepad, her expression suggesting there was more she wanted to discuss. "Do you think she regrets it? Selling the house, moving away?" Frank considered the question carefully. His relationship with his ex-wife had evolved over the 5 years since their divorce into something resembling friendship, not the close connection they had once shared, but a respectful acknowledgement of their shared history and continued connection through their children. "I don't think she regrets the decisions that were right for her," he said finally. "Maria needed different things than I did, more adventure, new experiences, less attachment to familiar patterns. That doesn't mean she doesn't treasure the years we spent raising you and Jason here. It just means her path forward needed to be different from mine." Rebecca nodded, absorbing his perspective. I used to think I was more like her, she admitted. Always looking toward the next achievement, the next level. Restless with the familiar. You have her drive, Frank acknowledged. Her intelligence. Her determination. But you found your own way of channeling those qualities. By coming back to the starting point, Rebecca said with a small laugh, gesturing around the kitchen that had witnessed her childhood. Not exactly the trajectory I imagined for myself. Coming back isn't the same as never leaving, Frank pointed out gently. You built an impressive career, established yourself professionally, proved what you're capable of achieving. Now you're choosing to apply those capabilities in ways that align more authentically with your values. That's not regression, Becca. It's integration. The word seemed to resonate with Rebecca, who considered it thoughtfully before responding. Integration. Yes, that feels right. Not abandoning what I've built or rejecting my ambitions, but bringing all the parts of myself into better alignment. As autumn deepened toward winter, this process of integration continued to unfold throughout the household. The physical renovation of the Oakwood house was largely complete by Thanksgiving, with only minor projects remaining for the spring. The family renovation, however, continued to evolve in subtle but significant ways. Rebecca's professional transition accelerated when two of her affordable housing designs won a prestigious sustainability award, bringing positive attention to her firm's new community development initiative. The recognition validated her vision, while opening doors to municipal partnerships that could expand the program's impact. Jason received a promotion at the environmental engineering firm where he worked, his increased salary allowing him and Melissa to save more aggressively toward eventually purchasing their own home while contributing fairly to the Oakwood house expenses. Melissa began preparing for maternity leave from her kindergarten teaching position, transforming the small room adjacent to their bedroom suite into a thoughtfully designed nursery. Frank found his own life enriched in unexpected ways by the multi-generational household arrangement. His experience and practical skills remained vital to maintaining the renovated home, giving him purpose beyond his maintenance supervisor job. The companionship of having family nearby eased the isolation he had sometimes felt in the years after the divorce, while the privacy of his own living space preserved his independence. As Christmas approached, the house on Oakwood Drive embraced its first holiday season under the new arrangement. The decorating became a family project, with treasured ornaments from Frank and Maria's collection mingling with newer acquisitions that reflected each household member's individual taste. Look what I found in the attic storage, Frank announced. One evening in mid-December, carrying a dusty box into the living room where Rebecca, Jason, and Melissa were arranging lights on the freshly cut Douglas fir that stood in the front window. Inside the box were handmade ornaments from the children's elementary school years, paper stars with school photos in the center, clothespin reindeer with googly eyes, salt dough handprints painted in bright colors and labeled with childish handwriting. Oh my God, Jason laughed, picking up a particularly awkward creation that vaguely resembled a snowman. I remember making this in second grade. Mrs. Peterson's class. And this one, Rebecca added, carefully lifting a faded paper angel. I was so proud of her wings. I spent hours cutting out the pattern. They hung these childhood treasures alongside the more sophisticated decorations Rebecca had selected, the juxtaposition somehow perfect, a visual representation of their family's evolution, the integration of past and present that characterized their renewed connection. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the living room for what Frank had declared would be a new family tradition, a special dinner followed by the exchange of one meaningful gift from each person to the others. The meal was collaborative, with each family member contributing a favorite dish. The atmosphere was relaxed yet festive. The renovated living room with its restored hardwood floors and carefully preserved architectural details providing a warm backdrop for their celebration. When the time came for gifts, Frank found himself unexpectedly nervous. He had put considerable thought into his selections, wanting each one to carry significance beyond its material value. I'll start, he said, reaching for the 3 packages he had placed beneath the tree earlier that day. To Jason and Melissa, he gave a handcrafted wooden cradle built from maple harvested from the tree that had once held their childhood swing. For the next generation, he explained as they admired the smooth curves and careful joinery that represented hours of work in his newly established garage workshop. To Rebecca, he presented a small velvet box containing not jewelry but a key. Ornate and clearly antique, its brass patina glowing in the Christmas lights. It's beautiful, she said, examining the intricate design. But what does it open? Nothing practical, Frank admitted. It's from the same era as your compass, actually. It was the master key to a hotel built in Portland in 1905, the Roosevelt, which was demolished in the 1960s. The architect was Catherine Welch, one of the first women to design commercial buildings in the Pacific Northwest. Rebecca looked up in surprise. I wrote a paper on Welch in graduate school. Her use of light in interior spaces was revolutionary for the time. Frank nodded, pleased that his research had been accurate. The key is a reminder that doors have been opened by those who came before you, and that your work can open doors for others who will follow. It seemed fitting as you embark on this new direction in your career. The thoughtfulness of the gift visibly moved Rebecca, who had once dismissed her father as too poor for a real gift, but now understood the depth of consideration that informed his choices. When it was Rebecca's turn to present her gifts, she handed Frank a thick envelope that proved to contain architectural drawings, detailed plans for converting the detached garage into a proper workshop, with specialized storage for his growing collection of woodworking tools, improved lighting, and climate control that would allow year-round use. I've already filed the permits, she explained as he studied the carefully rendered designs. Connor says his crew can start in February. The gift acknowledged Frank's rekindled passion for woodworking, a craft he had set aside during the busy years of raising children and supporting Maria's career but had rediscovered through the renovation process. It was, like his gift to her, a recognition of purpose and potential rather than just a material offering. As the evening drew to a close, Frank found himself standing by the front window, watching snow begin to fall gently on Oakwood Drive. The street looked much as it had during his first years in this house, though the neighboring homes had changed hands multiple times, families moving in and out as life circumstances shifted and opportunities called them elsewhere. Rebecca joined him at the window, her expression reflective in the glass. It's strange, she said quietly. A year ago I would have found this whole scenario implausible, us living together in the family home, me redirecting my career toward community-focused design, a baby on the way. If someone had described this future to me, I probably would have seen it as some kind of professional failure or regression. And now? Frank asked, curious about how she perceived the dramatic shifts in her life trajectory. Now it feels like the most authentic success I could have imagined, she replied simply. Not because I've abandoned ambition or professional standards, but because I'm applying them to things that actually matter to me. Frank nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Success, like wealth, was relative, defined not by external measures but by alignment with one's true values and purpose. You know, Rebecca continued, when I made that comment at my birthday party, about you being too poor for a real gift, I wasn't just being thoughtless or cruel. I was expressing something I truly believed at the time, that value was directly correlated with price, that worth could be measured in dollars. And now? Frank prompted again, hearing the shift in her perspective. Rebecca turned from the window to face him directly, her expression open and earnest in a way that reminded him of her childhood self. Now I understand that the most valuable gifts can't be purchased, she said. They're built through commitment, through showing up consistently, through applying your best skills to create something meaningful for people you love. She gestured around the beautifully renovated living room, which bore the imprint of each family member's contribution, Frank's craftsmanship evident in the restored woodwork, her own design sensibility in the thoughtful layout, Jason and Melissa's practical touches in the functional details. What you've given us isn't just a house, Dad. It's a lesson in what real wealth looks like. In what truly constitutes a real gift. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming Oakwood Drive into a scene from a holiday card. Inside, the family home glowed with warmth and light, sheltering not just 3 generations of Morgans but also the renewed understanding they had built together, that true value isn't determined by market prices or professional accolades, but by the authentic connections we create and the meaningful legacies we leave behind. The compass that had started their journey rested now on Rebecca's desk in her basement apartment, its needle still faithfully pointing north. But the true guidance system that had transformed their family lay in the lessons they had learned together. That wealth is measured in purpose rather than possessions, that success is defined by alignment rather than accumulation, and that even the most painful confrontations can lead to profound healing when approached with courage and openness. Frank Morgan, once dismissed as too poor for a real gift, had given his daughter something no amount of money could buy, the opportunity to rediscover what truly mattered, to realign her exceptional talents with her authentic values, to find her way home in every sense that mattered. And in doing so, he had received the greatest gift in return, the knowledge that his life's work of building foundations from which his children could launch their dreams had borne fruit in ways more meaningful than he could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.